Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. From Los Angeles, this is Adam Huss. Thanks for listening. Reduce, reuse, recycle. This is an important mantra and one that we've all heard and applied in some small or large way at home. But for my guest for this episode, this was more than a good idea. It was her career, and it led to her starting her winery. Lisa Bauer is the owner of Yamakiri, a winery she started when she discovered a feral sauvignon blanc vineyard full of grapes that were going to waste. That vineyard couldn't have been discovered by a better person. Lisa had recently retired from a career in recycling and had a viticultural philosophy inspired by Masanobu Fukuoka. After retiring, she bought land and moved to the Yorkville Highlands AVA of Mendocino County. Her desire to let nothing go to waste started her on a path to figure out what to do with those Sauvignon Blanc grapes, and led to a chain of events that resulted in her winery and her cidery called Sineater Ciders. With Yamakiri and Sineater, she continues to make use of that feral vineyard, which she allows to remain wild, as well as grapes and fruit from other organic and biodynamic vineyards and orchards. I had a blast getting to know Lisa a little bit, and I hope you do too. She's funny, smart, and truly inspiring. She forged her own path in wine by following her organic values and her desire to let nothing go to waste. Enjoy! Hey, Lisa. Thanks for doing this. You were so great to do this on short notice, and I would love you to just sort of introduce yourself and your winery, Cidery.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm glad I could do it on short notice as well. So my name is Lisa Bauer. I am the owner and everything but the winemaker of Yamakiri Wines and Sineater Ciders. Alex Krangle is our winemaker and cider maker, um, and we work collaboratively. It was a winery that started by happenstance. I was gifted a large volume of grapes. I'd been making wine and cider in my garage for years, and was gifted more grapes than I knew what to do with. Went to a custom crush facility in Anderson Valley and thought, okay, let me see if I can find out what it's going to cost me to do this. Um, and I did, and thought I would just have Christmas presents for the rest of the time, to give to people. Alex was the person there, and who he was at that point the assistant winemaker, and this was Sauvignon Blanc that was abandoned in Yorkville at the bottom of the hill where my house is located on a old sheep ranch, and
Oh, wow.
he tasted it and said, "This is really special. You should not just keep this for gifts." And that was basically how Yamakiri was born. Sorry, a long introduction for a very brief question.
No, that's fantastic. I was going to ask all of those questions anyway. When was that?
So that was like August, September of 2013. And that
Okay,
was
so
our
not.
first vintage. Um, and we ended up with that, and then um, we ended up making a rosé, and I was gifted some Syrah grapes and ended up uh, with three things at once.
Oh, all in that same year.
Yeah, so I started out with the Sauvignon Blanc, and ended up with basically a blended rosé that was leftovers from friends at the custom crush facility, and then the Syrah grapes fell into my lap.
Oh,
So
nice.
it kind of went from a fun thing to do and have Christmas presents to oh my God, I'm going to become a commercial winery, to oh my God, I have three varietals to sell.
um, that's fantastic. You and I have some interesting similarities. I was a home winemaker as well for years, and grapes didn't fall into my lap, but I had the same sort of experience of being like, all right, like I want to make this transition, and then being like, oh boy, and now we're doing this, and we're full fledged. Okay, here's a question for you.
Uh huh.
W- You did that. You started this, uh, and this wasn't the first thing you've done with your life. You were doing other things. Where did you come from? Like, what was your entree into, even being a home winemaker, and what was your life like before all this started?
Okay, so good questions. The home winemaker thing. I am scrappy and cheap. I hate wasting anything. If I came into possession of anything that I could ferment, I also like alcohol. It's my chosen drug. So if I came into contact with stuff that I could ferment, I usually did it. So when we had plums, I made slivovitz. When we had apples, I made some cider. When I bought the property up in Mendocino in '09, instead of having to go to Oak Barrel and buy grapes, I had like all of this second pick stuff that I could mess with for years, which was great. I didn't have to pay money for grapes that weren't even awesome. Oak Barrel is it's a facility in Berkeley that sells wine and beer making equipment and also sells grapes. Um,
Got
so
it. Okay.
I I I grew up with a dad who imported his own German wine because he couldn't stand the garbage that was being sold in America at that point in time. And he was American born but of heavy German descent. And I found out just recently that my grandfather, who had a house in and a factory in Hoboken for many years when he came over from Germany, lace making factory, had an entire square block of grape arbors. And I had no idea. I found this in pictures. So it seems like it kind of runs in the blood. I grew up with
Apparently,
my
yeah.
dad
You're just
watering down the Riesling, awesome Riesling from Germany, um, with water for Sunday dinners when I was like 5 and 6 years old. So
That's great.
I had wine for a long time around. My mother was a teetotaler and an adamant, she was ridiculous. She was temperance queen. Um, but my dad was a drinker and enjoyed wine. And I grew a love for wine. And I remember early on um, joining wine clubs. I came with him up to Mendocino eons ago, when he was still alive, back in the late '70s when he came out for a visit. And I just moved out to the Bay Area. We went up to Mendocino and we drove through Anderson Valley. And the only thing that was there was Navarro. Navarro and Handley were the only two things there that were
Wow.
open. And we went to the Navarro tasting room, and I actually joined the wine club when I in my 20s, and was a member until my late 40s, actually. It was
Wow.
great. I mean, it was great because they had
Yeah.
Edelzwicke and they had a Riesling and they had a Gewurz and they had stuff that was dry and it was relatively decent for America, which was
Yeah.
like just a godsend for me. Um,
Right.
but anyway, so that's kind
There
of
sounds like there was some nostalgia attached to those grapes as well for you.
there is, and it's a fascinating process to actually work with them, venting them as opposed to dreaming of drinking, um, good German wine. Um,
Right.
so the answer to the question about what I did before, that's a good one, and it's kind of why I approached winemaking and pretty much everything in my life the way that I do, and that is that um, prior to I retired at 50 from UC Berkeley. Prior to
Okay.
retiring, I was the campus recycling and refuse manager, and that was the job that I had done for 15 years, and before that, 10 years elsewhere. So basically, I went from waitressing and cooking in my teens and early 20s, putting myself through college, um, to uh, garbage and recycling and source reduction and reuse, up till I was 50, and then I retired. And the sourcing of those first set of Sauvignon Blanc grapes from the bottom of the vineyard, from the abandoned vineyard, was really just an extension of reuse for me. Um, I
Yeah.
mean, yes, I know the critters have their rights to the grapes, but really, did they need 4.5 acres? No. So, I mean, there were a lot that sat and
Definitely not.
fermented on the vine. So that was basically the connection, the ethos that moved me into what ended up becoming commercial winemaking.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's a great story, and I think from what I little I know about what you do, it sounds like you're continuing to carry that on, where you're finding sort of abandoned and neglected vineyards, or and trying to source fruit from places that just otherwise would go to waste or go back, to be unused for higher purposes, basically.
That is true to some extent. I wish I had
Okay,
more opportunity to do that. Um, the only grapes that I actually get that are that would not otherwise not be used are the Sauvignon Blanc, the ones that I grow now. I took over managing the vineyard and basically maintaining the vineyard. So that's the reason I still have access to them, and it's still relatively wild. I do nothing but I actually don't even mow anymore. I prune and I pick. So there's
right.
no water, no pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, no intervention. Nothing happens in that vineyard. It's an ecosystem that I enter and takes, some of the biomass out of and then leave. Um,
Wow.
so it's really a very unique situation. I wish I had access to more of those. I think other people, I was probably too loud in my praising the concept of, free stuff or cheap stuff from abandoned vineyards, because
Could
a
you
lot of other people have started doing that now, and it's harder for me to find feedstock. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
I
Well, and
also,
now there's
frankly, I mean, if anything, 2015 taught me a lesson. So my first harvest was 1.79 tons, I believe, out of a 2.5 acre vineyard, very low yield, but of course it's all dry farmed and it had been wild. So what do you expect? As I've pruned over the years and then picked, my yield has gone up and down. But 2015, when we had no rain, I got 0.25 tons of grapes. So
wow.
those were the most expensive bottles of Sauvignon Blanc I have ever made. And of course, I couldn't change the price, but they were basically a gift to the customers who had stuck with me. I ended up with, I want to say, 26 cases. Yeah, it
Wow.
was it
Yeah.
was it was pretty interesting. So yeah, that's
Yeah, that I had a wine that just everything went wrong with. I mean, other than the making of the wine, which it was delicious wine from really great grapes, but then logistics and breakage and all of these things like just went one right after. I mean, anything that could have gone wrong from the time, it was made to trying to sell it did go wrong, and I was like, it just became a joke where I was like, well, the price just went up,
right.
like the price per bottle, like to the point where you're like, yeah, this is the most expensive wine ever made, possibly, like there's no way to other, there's no, it's priceless at a certain
Yeah,
point.
that was my joke about the Sauvignon Blanc. I was like, I should just give this to everyone for Christmas presents because it's an
Right.
insult for me to even try to get any money on this. It's like pennies on the dollar. I'm like, just leave it alone. But yeah, it's I think that's what they say separates the what is it, the girls from the women, or the boys from the men in terms of who wants to stay in the business. I've had
Uh-huh.
two of those years, one with incredibly low yields, another one with a rampant secondary fermentation issue that was just, uh, it was like the universe telling me, learn how to make pet nat.
Right.
So, which I was doing already, but it moved me even more in that direction. So yeah, I get it. I get what you're saying. In final answer to your question about the other grapes and the apples, at this point, I source. If I don't grow stuff myself, and I did have one other Chardonnay vineyard under my control for a bit, which was fabulous, also abandoned. Um, if I don't source, if I don't grow it myself and I don't source wild, I tend to source certified biodynamic or organic. Not always certified organic, but pretty much always certified biodynamic, just because that's what's available in the valley. I juggle a
Yeah.
series of priorities, one of which is I want to stay as local as possible because it has less of a footprint. I
Yeah.
want to support and um, promote the valley as much as I can because I live there and I love it. And I am not always fond of what the wine industry has done to the valley. And I think
Yeah.
that I'd like to be another example. I'd like to be an example of someone who's more local and doesn't just come in, rake rake some profits in, and leave. Um,
Yeah.
Far from that, actually. Profits not so much, but um, and I also think that the valley has got particularly um, unusual and really lovely terroir. I also really, really like the Yorkville Highlands where I'm located. So the goal was to try to stay local and to try to work with what was there. And that moved me away from just abandoned and wild to stuff that I could access, but that still was grown in a careful enough method.
Yeah, and at a certain point, if you start getting demand for your wine, I imagine you have to start thinking about consistent production. And if you're just using abandoned things that one year might be, a ton per acre, and the next year might be a quarter ton per acre, it's hard to be consistent.
Yeah.
Um, you and that, gosh, I have several questions. I want to go back to the first of all about the vineyard, the utter neglect that you farm it with. I say jokingly, um in a I mean I because I really admire that, and I'm just curious, no issues with disease, mildew, like, I mean, is it just, you know the vines get those things but they still manage to ripen grapes? I mean, have you learned anything from just observing
Yep.
what happens in that vineyard?
Yep. Yeah. So that's a really good question. I started working with the vineyard. I had taken all of the classes at Davis that one can take and not be an enrolled student. I did the extension stuff. So I had learned everything that one needed to know about killing the yeast on the grapes by over sulfuring them and irrigating the hell out of them to get a higher blah, blah, blah. And none of these things were possible, or none of these things were things I wanted to do in the vineyard. And I sure I started out mowing with a big heavy tractor and pruning and shoot positioning, and I realized, I was incredibly fortunate. I had a vineyard that did not need any of these things. I don't have any pest pressures, knock wood. But I think part of why I don't have any pest pressures, frankly, is because I am in an ecosystem that I have not manipulated, and I have the luxury of being in that ecosystem because the vineyard was abandoned long enough that it reached this kind of stasis that I then
Mm,
walked into and was fortunate enough to be able to benefit from and not screw up before I realized that I didn't need to screw with it. That's the real
right.
answer. If you want the textbook answer, it's that, and this is also the real answer. Alex and I share a love for things Japanese, if you can tell, um,
Uh-huh.
and very specifically
Yamakiri.
for the teachings of Masanobu Fukuoka,
Yeah.
which I read in my 20s when I started gardening in Ohio when I was going to college, and revisited again as I was looking at this vineyard and thinking, why do we do all this caca to this poor vineyard? And then Alex just mentioned to me there was a biodynamic study group and they were reading One Straw Revolution. And I was like, oh my God, I remember that book. And I went back and read it and I was like, okay, here is my litmus test. Here is the vineyard. Let's give it a shot. So
Yeah.
that stopped me from doing just about anything.
Yeah.
I take what I call a very Fukuoka approach, which is virtually nothing, um, but a lot of observation,
Right.
and that has served me really well. All of that said, I acknowledge that I am incredibly lucky. I do not have some of the pressures that other vineyards do, and I've had the luxury of walking into a situation that is not a crisis.
Right. It had already achieved some level of
Right,
balance and dynamic
right,
balance, basically.
right.
That's, yeah, yeah. And it's funny, several points of that were, I followed that same sort of path and have read Fukuoka and enjoy him as well. The other question I had from what you had started talking about was just in terms of going back to getting this thing off the ground. It sort of fell into your lap. At what point, if ever, did you think about a business plan, or did you just kind of start to follow, like keep track of the costs and expenses, and well, we got to sell this much for this much, and take it from there? Or how did that, from the business side, how did you approach it?
So I'm kind of smirking as you say business plan because I never wrote one. Um,
Yeah.
so this is my retirement. Um, I retired at 50 back in 2010, and I sat in my bathrobe for 2 years, which was fun and really, really good because I had been like an overachiever, and it was really nice to chill. And then I was like, and I'm bored. So I
Yeah.
realized I needed to do something. And the something that I did was basically I decided to take $40,000 that a relative had given me and throw it at this project. And that was it. And not a penny more. Um, and so um, I have basic business savvy. Years before I worked in recycling, I actually worked at Rainbow Grocery in San Francisco, which is a collective. That's another aspect of
Yeah.
my life that doesn't really doesn't really directly impact wine, but is a very strong influence in my life, which is working collectively or cooperatively. I had a pretty extensive business experience running Rainbow Grocery because basically, when you're a collective, if you're someone that has an aptitude at something, frequently you end up doing it. So I learned a whole lot about business that my degree from Oberlin in philosophy and environmental ethics did not teach me. So it wasn't that hard. I can run a spreadsheet, I can run QuickBooks, and I didn't have any intention of doing any more than breaking even. To be honest with you, I still have never taken a salary. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
I do all the work for free, basically. Um, I know that sounds ridiculous, but it means that I'm in really good wine, which I enjoy and appreciate.
That
Um,
saves a little money, I'm sure.
yeah, I I have finally started paying myself for deliveries, at the whatever the IRS allowed mileage rate is. But the irony is that my husband and I are the cheapest workers that Yamakiri wine will ever get. Um, and Alex was paid through the custom crush until that closed. And since then, we've been trading. I take on all of the business aspect of his winery, which is Azola Wines, which you probably saw on the website. And
Yes,
that's
yeah.
his deal. And in exchange, he does winemaking for me. So again, we're kind of collaborating. So no, I don't have a business plan. And it probably, if I had thought that this was going to be more than I bumbled into this, let's be honest. I completely bumbled into this. Nor did I have great expectations, nor frankly, and I have to be honest, I'm incredibly fortunate. Um, I, uh, I, I inherited enough resources from family, and also saved enough money while I was working that I don't need to worry about paying myself for the um, sometimes more than full time work that I do with Yamakiri. Um, the cost of the wine reflects that. Uh, is it sustainable? No. Is it fun? Yes. Do I make good wine? Yes. Am I happy with it? Pretty much.
Nice. Okay. I mean, I'm fascinated by that, and I'm fascinated by the partnership with Alex too. I mean, it's very unusual. I would imagine in a business partnership. Like, where are the lines drawn? How does that work?
So that's a really good question. So here's how it started, and here's how it's evolved, and I assume it will continue to evolve. Um, Initially, Alex, as an employee of the custom crush facility, made wine for me with me giving basic guidance on what I wanted, and that was because that was kind of the nature of the custom crush facility. I realized pretty quickly that Alex was a far better winemaker than I would ever be. And kind of spoke with him about it. I was like, how how do you feel about taking more of a stage in this process and being our official winemaker? And he was like, you can do that. That's fine. I'm still an employee of this facility, but anyway, um,
Right.
it evolved. I ended up basically taking on every other aspect of the winery and of the cidery. Um, besides the actual wine and cider making. Alex was incredibly helpful. Clearly he's in the industry. Frequently, these were his ideas. I do not pretend to any kind of brilliance or insight into choosing varietals besides what I like to drink. So it was his idea. And it was his idea to. He wanted to make cider. He comes from the East Coast, from Vermont. Was it New Hampshire? I can
Yeah.
never remember. Vermont or New Hampshire, and he loves cider, and he was like, let's try to make cider. And it was a cost effective and fun thing to do, and my god, did it take off. And I'm like, oh, okay, there we go. So again, this is just huge bumbling on my part. um, Alex, as we worked together more and more, and he realized that I really was sincere about the concept of partnering with him, which I don't think he had been interested in or really thought was possible initially. It takes working with someone for a while to kind of get it. We have very similar work ethics, and also very similar approaches to life and many other things.
Hmm.
As we evolved, and Alex put out the concept and the interest in making his own wine, he kind of, with a nod to the lineup that we were making for Yamakiri, he was like, you only have basically one red, either a Pinot or Syrah, and I'd like to work with other uh, heavier reds, and it could be a complement to what Yamakiri offers. And I said, okay. And I, in turn, would be happy to work on the marketing and the sales of this with you. So he makes it, and as appropriate, I bring in and taste people out on it. So I'm basically the sales rep for Azola, but he completely and wholly owns it. Um,
Got it.
and I'm hosting him at this point on the website, because it just makes sense. I assume at some point there will be a break, and I'm sure it will be amicable. And it's served us well. I do what I do well. He does what he does well. It's division of labor, and it's been. I hope, you'd have to ask him it quietly, without me around, whether it's been um, everything that he had hoped and expected, but it has been on my end.
Yeah, I totally understand. No, it's great though. And uh, Yorkville Highlands, let's talk a little bit about that. You guys are sort of adjacent to the Anderson Valley AVA, but it's all part of one big valley, essentially, right?
It is.
Or
Well, it
not?
matters who you talk to and under what conditions.
Okay.
Uh, so
Well, Yorkville's a little, I would say, warmer. You get a little less of
yes,
the ocean influence,
yes,
a little further inland,
yes,
and so you can ripen more like cabs and the Southern Rhone
right.
varieties, Bordeaux. What else? Where else are you? I mean, is that mainly where you're
That's
getting?
it.
Are you getting from
I
that
I
whole
do
region?
Yorkville
Okay.
Highlands. For a while I did Mendocino Ridge, which is the only
Okay.
non-contiguous elevation-oriented appellation in the United States, I believe. Um,
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I'm
and
looking at an AVA map. It's
that was
yeah.
fine then. And then the grapes that I liked working with there were no longer available. So I am only Yorkville Highlands and Anderson Valley. um, I like the stuff from Yorkville because because we have a very different soil type than Anderson Valley. We have Franciscan melange, which is a challenging and interesting soil type, but brings forth some, I think, really lovely characteristics. We also have an
Hmm.
elevation, and I like working with that. That does, in many ways, um, help with some of the pest pressures,
Yeah.
but also has its own challenges associated with it. Um, we do have a warmer climate. In many ways, we are kind of where I think Anderson Valley is going 20 to 30 to 50 years from now with global warming or climate change or whatever we call it these days. So it's I think it's an interesting um, counterpoint and yet a very similar area, if that makes sense. That's probably getting a little too geeky. I'm sorry. But,
No, no, the geeky is what we're all about here.
so yeah, I like Yorkville
I
Highlands, and I also, the other reason, frankly, I like Yorkville Highlands is that it is still a really human, small scale, everyone knows everyone appellation, and there's
mm,
something nice about that. I grew up in a small town. I was a doctor's daughter, and so
mm.
I was everyone knew my dad, and I couldn't get away with anything in a small town, and I thought I would never live in a small town again, and here I am in a small town and enjoying that which it brings, familiarity, knowledge, friendship, camaraderie, similarity.
Do you miss anything living in the Bay Area, Berkeley?
Well, since I come back to Berkeley every week, basically, both to do deliveries and to do whatever other incidental stuff I need to, shopping, no, not at all. As a matter of fact, if I could find a way of doing it less frequently, I probably would.
Nice.
The thing I miss
Yeah.
the most, don't laugh, it's the internet. We are in a
Sorry, I
digital
laughed.
divide up there. We have really slow internet, and I live 5 miles up a dirt road off the grid with bad satellite internet that I can't believe I have to pay for. So yeah,
Wow.
that would be the only thing that I could safely say. Now in the middle of COVID, right? Can't go to movies, restaurants really aren't happening, so there is nothing
Right.
in the Bay Area that I need to come to that I can't access up there.
Got it. Yeah. It's I I love that area. I just came up we one of our wines comes from Hopland area,
I
a
noticed
cab.
your cat in the cab.
Yeah, yeah. And it was my first time exploring around that area. It's beautiful. And it has that sort of the thing that I love about Northern California where, it's gorgeous, but it also feels rugged and isolated at the same time. It's kind of just you feel like grapes had to have come from a place similar to that. Just this sort of I don't know, everything about it is gorgeous.
Yeah. So
Did
yeah,
you I mean,
it's a great, I love it up there. And it is incredibly beautiful and close to the ocean, which I always want to be. So
yeah. Did you plan to uh grow wine when you were looking for property? I mean, did you plan to like was a wine any wine even at a home style level part of the plan for
yes,
the property?
it was.
Okay.
Going a little further back in my life, when I grew up in New Jersey, I grew up on a farm, and even though my dad was a gentleman farmer and it was considered a tax write-off, we actually did the work. And
Right.
lo and behold, just like living in a small town and not possibly imagining wanting to do that again, who in their right mind thought that I would want to be digging ditches and uh, feeding the chickens and doing the stuff that I now happily do.
Right.
So I'm, going back to my roots. I figured that if I was going to pay for grapes and I was somewhere where it was a relatively reasonable appellation and I could grow grapes, why wouldn't I want to grow grapes? So that was in my mind. Um,
Yeah.
the more I got up there, the more I looked at the soil profile, which is in many ways on my property ridiculous. The only water that I would have that would be realistic is boron heavy, to the point where
Oh wow.
the vines really would suffer. But
Right.
everything else was perfect. And also, the soil composition is so heavily magnesium that the amount of modification that it would take to make it work for grapes is such that it wouldn't have been a jump in and do it right now. I wouldn't have had success in 3 to 5 years being happy that I had stuff on the vine. So that was kind of why
Right.
I started looking to the vineyard at the bottom of the hill, on the private road that I'm on, and the rest just kind of fell into place. I
Nice.
have grown a few vines. They don't do well on our property, so it's fine. I mean, there's many things that you juggle when you decide to try to buy property, and if the vine
Right.
part fell off, it's okay.
Right. That soil is that called serpentine? The
It
one
is.
that's
Franciscan
magnesium?
melange is
Yeah.
very, very heavily serpentine in areas. Well, so the whole melange thing is means a mix. From what I understand, it's
Right.
accreted sea terrain from millions of years ago. So you get these pockets of weird, different chemical things in it that are, and
Yeah.
literally from foot to foot, you can get them. Um,
Oh,
so it's
wow.
a very, very odd, weird kind of potentially fabulous growing area. There's a winery or a vineyard just 2 properties away from me, who is on they're at like 2,400 feet, and he is growing Rhone varietals. Halcon is the name of the winery, um, and he is growing Rhone varietals, and they're struggling in the soil, and let's face it, there are some aspects in which that is exactly what you're looking for to get the characteristics out of the grape that are more fun to work with. But
Yeah, I imagine with like the really vigorous, Grenache and Syrah, that would probably be, a nice sort of
yeah,
counterpart,
yeah, the
like a,
limiting
thing
factor
to keep
that works with
limiting
it.
factor, right?
But for me and Pinot and wanting to do whites, I was not sure that I had the right, and I'm also much lower, and I've got a slightly different situation than he does in different water. So anyway, it was an intention. It ended up not being the reality. That's okay. There are a lot of grapes out there. I also have to say that as climate change has reared its head in more realistic ways, as I was actually crunching numbers and looking at putting in a vineyard, and I had always intended to put in a vineyard. I was either going to do Pinot or Nebbiolo. I was hoping that I might have the right situation to do a Vermentino or maybe even Albarino. I just realized that the return on investment is so sketchy with the water situation that we're looking at up there that it
Right.
doesn't make financial and economic sense. It doesn't make ecological sense either, um,
Yeah.
to really do that when there are grapes out there. There's so many good grapes out there.
Right.
So it's the reality of looking at what you're doing versus the romance of having a vineyard. Um,
Right.
and I got to be like a grandparent with the Sauvignon Blanc vineyard. I didn't own it, but I completely ran it, managed it, and yeah, it's a lot of work. Even if you do very little, which is what I do, it's a lot of work. So I am not hellbound and determined to put grapes in the ground.
In that soil.
Fabulously.
Same.
Interesting you bring that up. There are 3 fruit that do really well there. Um, the property that we bought had an orchard that had been cut down at the direction of the real estate agent who sold the property to us, because he
Ugh.
thought that whoever bought this would be a hobby winery person or a hobby vineyard grower. And I wanted to cry when I heard that. They left 1 apple tree and 2 chestnut trees, which are fabulous and do really well. Um,
Wow.
but the other trees that we planted, it's kind of a joke. I've got peaches, I've got pomegranates, I've got persimmons, I've got plums, I've got quince, I've got walnuts and pistachios, and I'm just going through the rows and trying to see if I've lost any cherries and nectarines, and I got to tell you, and apricots. And the only thing that does not have horrible pest pressures uh, is the apples and the quince and the plums. Everything else
Oh.
is suffering at best, I think would be the way to put it.
Wow.
And
Even
yeah,
persimmons and
I don't have the weather.
wow.
I'm at 1,800 feet. So
Got it.
even though
Yeah.
I have hot summers, I don't have enough of the weather that you need to get the ripening that you want.
Got it.
So
Got it. Yeah.
I laugh because when we went from the first year that we made cider, we had apples that we fell into, and I had a bumper crop of quince that year. And so without having much discussion about it, I was like, Alex, do you have any thoughts about quince? And he's like, bring them down. And they all went into the cider. So it was actually apple
Yeah.
quince cider. And it was less than 5%. So we didn't necessarily feel like we needed to talk about it. But yeah, there was
But
there
it's
was
that
there was
magic
quince from our
ingredient.
property in there.
Nice.
Yeah, we did the same thing with
And
pears. Actually, we were gifted a bunch of pears, and we made a perry. And I ended up with a few pears from my tree. They went on. So yeah, it's there's a lot of fruit in that valley. So the valley, Anderson Valley, has had all these interesting subsequent waves of agricultural development. So we had the Native Americans who, clearly did a better job than we did at land management. And then initially we got hops growing, hence the term hopland. And hops
right.
was the thing that was grown besides sheep in the valley for a while. And then that was followed by apples. And at one point in time, the apple production in Anderson Valley was unbelievable. I think I read somewhere that they cut down an equivalent of 25 cords of wood per day per apple drying. This is dried apples
Wow.
per apple drying shed, and there were 30 of them in the valley. So that is how much wood was getting cut down and burned per day to dry apples. This is many, many years ago.
Sheesh.
And there, of course, apple trees are persistent, so they've been around for a very long time. Um, and
Right.
then, of course, we had the redwood. Everyone cutting down the redwoods and all the logging that went
Um,
on. And then we had grapes move in, and now we have pot. So it's just one
yeah.
agricultural wave after the other. And the question is, where are you in the progress of the wave? Are you at the head of it? Are you at the end of it and getting the sloppy seconds? Anyway. So,
An eater.
yep,
It's Alex.
it's ours.
It's
I
ours.
mean,
Okay.
if you want to know who owns it, I own it.
Okay.
And
Got it.
who pays the
Yeah.
taxes? I paid the taxes. But
Got
it
it.
was very much Alex's idea, and I think he opened the Instagram account for Sineater, and we've never figured out how to transfer it over to me. So I don't really care. I mean, we're singing under the same hymnal. It doesn't matter.
right.
So I'm fine with that. I probably should be more worried about ownership, but I'm not. Um,
So I'm
so
guessing the name alludes to like the Garden of Eden and eating the forbidden fruit kind of thing.
Interesting you should bring that up. So Alex, God bless him, is an interesting and dark soul who spends hours thinking about weird, convoluted stuff like this. He had heard the term sin eater and did some research, and loved the name and proposed the name and was like, we have to use this name. And initially I thought it was, there's the double entendre. There's not only apples, the original sin. By the way, they believe that the original tree was a quince tree, not an apple tree, but we won't go there. Um, Given the
Here I thought it was
location
pomegranate.
but anyway, um, th- so that's the one. That's one of the meanings. But the other one, sin eater, is the actual story of what a sin eater was, and I can do this relatively quickly. Here's my understanding of a sin eater. Um, I believe it's Appalachia or the southeastern hills of the United States. Back in the day when there was really not easy transportation, people took horses places. People lived in the hills, and if you were dying or gravely ill and likely to die, um, there was a desire to have some kind of religious, person there, or some way of absolving your sins at its most basic level, um, either last rites or a confession or whatever it was that your particular religious flavor was interested in. Um, and because people were so remote, they did not always have the minister have the luxury of getting there before the person died. A construct was developed apparently in these hills that had to do with finding another way to absolve sin. And it went like this. There was someone in the town, uh, whether chosen or just self-appointed or designated, I don't really know, but they were basically the quote unquote sin eater. Um, and what they did is at night or in cover of darkness or when no one knew or whenever it was an appropriate time, the whoever was dying or at that point possibly dead would be laid out. They'd put a plate on the stomach of the person. They put a piece of bread on the plate. There was a belief that the sins would leave the body of the person and migrate into the piece of bread. The sin eater was the person who came to the house knowing that there was someone dead or dying and ate the bread, thereby removing and absolving the dying person or dead person. I
Right.
would not want to be that person,
Yeah,
no
that
matter how
bread
hungry I
wouldn't.
was.
Bread doesn't sound very appetizing.
No,
Um, did they then have to go purge themselves in some way
no one
to?
talks about that, and I'm sure that there's like
Yeah, I
the
wonder.
next story, right? But
Right.
yeah, I would hope that they would, because that I can't even imagine. Talk about two classes of
Right.
citizens. They so anyway, Doug's my husband, sorry. Alex really liked the story and liked it so much that he was not taking no for an answer. Um
Yeah.
and so we decided that I was like, okay, let's go with it. Fine. And it's really resonated. What ended up being kind of like this difficult, weird thing to explain to people has actually ended up becoming something of interest that people seem to. I don't know why, but it's fascinating and it's a pretty good story. So
Yeah. No, it's
Alex was
well,
right, I
I'm
was
a
wrong, which is so frequently the case.
well, I'm a religion major, so I'm a sucker for anything
Ah,
related. So yeah, not religious, but studied it.
got it,
I
got
think
it.
I think that goes hand in
Yep.
hand.
No, I get it. So that's ended up
Well,
becoming
tell me.
anything with carbonation, and that includes the Pet Nat and the Pet Nat Rosé, as well as the
Got it. So
Cherry
that's
and
all.
all of
That
the apple ciders.
and where are you getting your fruit? I know Filigree Farm is one.
Yep.
Is that the main source?
No, well, it varies from year to year. So that's a good question.
Okay.
Um, Green Farm, I just have to stop for a moment and do just a little blurb on Green Farm because they are a fabulous supplier. They are an oasis of earthly delights in the middle of Anderson Valley that no one knows about and that I wish more people knew about. But yeah, it's a certified biodynamic farm. Chris and Steph, who own it, are fabulous at what they do. She's the brains and the brawn and the organization, and he's the mad scientist, and it's a great combo. His
Love it.
but they he loves apples and fruit of any kind. He has, I want to say, does he have like 15 or 20 varietals growing regularly? So I mean, he's got stuff like Cox Pippin and Smokehouse and a Ribston Pippin and Sierra Beauty and Maiden's Blush. And I mean, his varieties of apples are fabulous and all really, really excellent to work with. Um, and because he packs out for food production, he doesn't have a number two and a number three kind of market. So he would routinely sell me his apples number twos, or actually, yeah, they were number twos, and he'd sell them to me at a number three price. God bless him. So I was using fabulous apple stock to make apples. The first year I did actually, did I do five? No, I did three. I did three separate varietals. They were varietal specific apple ciders, which was really
Mm.
fun. But no one seemed to really care. It was fun for me, but like the public was like, really good apple cider. I'm like, no, that's Sierra Beauty apple cider, or that's Smokehouse apple cider, or that's, and they were like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm like, okay. So that, and it was a lot of work keeping everything separate and fermenting everything separately.
Right.
The next year we worked with Green and we just started blending. And honestly, I get why old apple cider makers blended, because you really do get phenomenal characteristics that work well
Mm.
together as you blend. So worked with Green for a few years, and then um, Green got another a buyer who bought a lot of apples, and they became scarcer and more expensive. So I pivoted, and Alex and I went down one of the roads in Anderson Valley, which had a lot of old apple orchards on it, many of which were abandoned, many of which people then built houses on and just let the orchards be. And we knocked on doors and called people and FaceTime or Facebook, hit them via Facebook and said, "So, could we harvest your apples and either pay you or trade you for cider?" And people were incredibly gracious and were like, "Yeah, sure, just take them." So we did. So we have one cider that was literally made with abandoned and wild apples from Ornbaum Road. And that's what it is. It's they're just it's just whatever apples came in, the russeted, the we got we're very lucky. There's really pretty good quality fruit there. So we didn't have a whole lot of number threes. It was number ones and number twos, and cider with that. So we work sometimes with filigree. Sometimes if we can find going back to our roots of wild and abandoned. Um, so
I
it's
love
what's
that.
available that year. I will also say that I also buy all of my Pinot Noir from Filigree, and I buy Pinot Gris from Filigree to pet nat with. So I'm not just into them for apples and sometimes pears, but also a lot of grapes, and their grapes are also.
Well, and you're making some non-traditional ciders or
Yeah.
you're just doing some interesting things, right? You're hopping some cider, you're blending with grape,
So yeah,
or
that is more of the let's go back to the bumbling aspect here. I'll give Alex credit. I'm sure he thought all of this through and was really, really concise and careful in how he let this all develop. But bottom line is the regular cider we made, the varietal specifically made, and then the next year we tried the hops because I don't know whether you know this, but um, for many, many, many years, cider makers have used hops, small amounts of hops, as a preservative and as yeah, I guess it's predominantly a preservative in cider. It's a pretty common thing. And as we were both researching cider, we learned more and more about it and realized, oh wow, people have been using hops forever in making cider. It's one of the elements that they don't always list, but and it doesn't need to be particularly prevalent if you don't want it to be, but it is a flavor
well, I
profile that
imagine,
people like. So we actually
yeah, I
did a Citra
imagine,
Amarillo, really heavily hopped cider that smelled like pot. It was outrageous. And it was really good and people really liked it. So we kind of stuck with that. But we actually hop every cider that we've got to a much lesser degree
oh,
for a small
okay.
amount of
Well,
preservation because we don't do anything else with the apples. They're literally off the tree. It's native yeast and it's native fermentation, and I'm not putting any preservatives in it. So if hops will give me that little bit of preservation to get me so that I'm not passed out after 9 months, then I'll take it. And I like the crispness of it as well. I like the flavor profile it brings. You're also probably
well,
referring to the co-ferments, and
yeah.
that was I'm going to be honest with you, it was a complete mistake. Um, or actually, it was laziness. It was laziness. We were
Hey, well,
pressing apples that needed to be pressed, some Sierra Beauties.
laziness is the mother of
It
invention, I
so
think.
totally is. Are you kidding? Are you seeing a theme here? Um, so the bumbling lazy person. So we had Sierra Beauties that we needed to press. It was late in the afternoon. We had pressed the Albarino off uh, of the stems earlier that day. It was still in the press. We needed to do the apples. We wanted to go home. I looked at Alex. Alex looked at me. He was like, "You need to clean the press." I was like, "No, you need to clean the press." And we looked at each other and we're like, "Screw it." And we just dumped the apples in to the pumice, the Albarino pumice. We're like, it's
Yeah.
fine. And multiple things happened. Um, it was the best cider that we ever made. I sold out within like 3 weeks. I was like, oh
Mm.
my God. And not only that, but instead of having to buy rice hulls, which I don't like as a bulking agent, because basically when you're pressing fermented apples, it's like applesauce. It doesn't press well.
Hmm.
It's you
Right.
need a bulking agent. And voila, the seeds and stems and skins of the grapes, which are fabulous at giving us the capacity to bulk and then allow juice drainage more elegantly. We got, I think, 30% higher yield, a whole different flavor
Wow.
profile. We didn't have to clean the press out but once. And
Most
yeah,
importantly.
no, it was such a happy mistake. Um,
Yeah, that's
and once
awesome.
we realized that that was a good thing, we were like, okay. So then we've since done Gewurz, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noir. Trying to think what else.
Do you
Albarino.
have a favorite of any of
Say
those?
it again.
Do you have a favorite of
Oh, the
any
Pinot
of your?
Noir. Oh my God, it is the best.
Really?
Well, so
Oh,
I mean, I love the tannic profile of the Pinot Noir against the tannic profile of the apples.
yeah.
And it's pretty. It's I laughed. I was doing a tasting with a store that I sell to, and the person who was tasting with me was a millennial, and she's like, "Oh my God, it's millennial pink," and I'm like, "Is that a thing? Is that?"
That is a
I have
thing.
no clue
That's
what.
so great.
Anyway, apparently it's millennial pink, but it's really tasty and really delicious, and I love the hints of the strawberry and a little bit of the
That's
vegetal
so
sense that comes with the Pinot Noir mixed with the apple. It's just I love it. It's my summer jam.
and
It's
this
what I
is
drink all summer.
that sounds fantastic. And this is all it's already like so you've already made wine straight, like normal Pinot Noir wine from those grapes. You've pressed them and now you're adding the apple juice to the pressed grapes. Is that always the way you do it
Yep.
now?
So here's the theme again,
Okay.
right? Reuse. I
Yeah.
mean,
That's
it makes
fantastic,
sense.
right?
You don't want to overpress any of your grapes because you don't want those characteristics. You want to go relatively gently.
Right.
And yet there is so much still left in the grapes that if mix something else and spin it and bulk it out, you're going to get more juice. So we figured we've done enough analysis to acknowledge that it's about 90% apples and about 10% grapes.
Got it. Yeah. So let me ask you something about making cider. You're talking about throwing the apples in the press. Have they already been crush point or
That's a good question. So we do apples in a kind of old school way. So everything that we get comes in. We do not wash it. We do not. I basically go through every apple with a knife and clean out stuff that's nasty because I don't like funky cider. I like clean cider. Which
yeah,
is when we did 5 tons one year. Oh my God, was I over it?
it's a lot of
I
work.
never wanted to look at another friggin' apple in my life. But anyway, there were good results. So, and then we
Sounds
had
like
you also shouldn't laugh at this. We had um, undersized equipment for the volume that we were putting through. So I had basically
oh,
a home grinder that you could throw 3 or 4 apples in at a time, and we did five
oh
tons
my
worth of
god.
apples, 3 or 4 apples at a time. And what it
Oh
does
my
is just
god.
it grinds it into irregular sized chunks. It's called
Okay.
scratting them. East Coast term for it is scratting,
Scrap.
SCRATTING, which is breaking them into irregular sized chunks. And then you let them
Got it.
ferment. And some of the larger chunks still maintain. The skins are still there, of course, the stems, seed, the whole
Right.
apple. But it does definitely ferment and size reduce and break down to a point so that when you eventually press it, it has already been completely broken down into very lumpy applesauce.
Okay, got it. So you're pressing essentially off the fermented
Yep.
pumice, the same as you do with the wine. Got it.
Yeah.
And are you using like a Euro press, like a big bladder press, or is it what kind of press is
That
it?
was exactly what we were using. That was what was available. It's
Okay.
not the most efficient
Yeah.
way of doing it, and that's why the introduction of the grapes made a huge difference in volume. Huge.
Got it. Got it. That's very cool. So are you doing any straight ciders now that you've figured
I
out
do do
how
a
much?
straight cider. I do a traditional because there are people that like vanilla, so that's traditional.
Sure.
And it's still my biggest seller. It's usually what I keg uh,
Okay.
because when you're doing that kind of volume, you usually want. I don't want to call it the lowest common denominator, but I want to call it the least challenging and weird thing. So yes, I do it. We
Right.
do a traditional cider, and then we do 4 other ciders. Or this year we
Got
did
it.
4 other ciders.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I'm a huge cider fan, and I'm really glad to be seeing the sort of renaissance of ciders across the nation right now
Hmm.
that's happening. It's very exciting. I'm glad you guys are making what you're making. I can't wait to try it, actually.
Oh.
Getting thirsty just talking about it. So, but let's talk about your wines because we did kind of skipped over the wines, and maybe we should sort of wrap up with you sort of talking about those. So, obviously, you're making a Pinot, and uh, do you want to talk about the farming that goes into any of these, or anything any stories behind any of the wines, and just
I'll happily go into this. And it's important for me to talk about the farming because, frankly, that's kind of a good 40 to 50% of why we're doing this in the first place.
Yeah.
So yes, farming is important. We did 4 varietals this year, or we actually did four wines this year. We did a the Sauvignon Blanc, and you've heard enough about that vineyard. Everything that we make comes in. There's nothing on it, no sulfur, nothing.
Right.
Not even irrigation. It's completely dry
Right.
farm. So it comes in. It's a spontaneous fermentation. We sulfur only at bottling. The Sauv Blanc is filtered, sterile filtered, and when you understand the whole concept of secondary fermentation, you understand why. So it is sterile filtered, and we sulfur probably between 15 and 30 ppm at bottling. And then it goes
Okay.
in bottle. It's really straightforward. It's very simple. We don't add sugar. We don't add water. We don't add tartaric acid. We don't add any of the fining agents, or it's basically wine with a small amount of sulfur to preserve it. I sell
Right.
predominantly to restaurants, and well, not anymore, but I used to sell predominantly to restaurants and markets, and I don't have a whole lot of control about how stuff is stored. And the last thing that I need when I'm at a really razor thin profit margin is to have returns because stuff goes bad. And when I
Yeah.
started making natural wine, or what I call natural wine, there weren't as many people that were hip to natural wines, and getting returns just sucks. So
Yeah.
I started sulfuring a small amount because I had done nothing in the vineyard, so I was okay doing a small amount at bottling. So that's the Sauv Blanc.
Right.
That we also did an Albarino this year. I love Albarino. It is one of my absolute favorite varietals in the entire world. I wish I could grow it, but I don't think I can where I'm located.
Mm.
Um, there are only 2 plantings that we know of in Anderson Valley, and probably only 3 or 4 in all of Mendocino County. It is not a varietal that anyone works with a whole lot in Northern California, and which is a shame because I love the acid. And probably something that I should
Yeah.
talk about is that the acid profile in all of our wines is pretty high, and that's because of the chemistry and not wanting to have to add anything else or screw with the wines and add chemicals. The higher your the higher your acid, the lower the bricks you pick at, and the higher acid gives you access to a better, in my mind, a better flavor profile, a more durable wine with less addition of anything. And frankly, I think it's more food friendly. But
Yeah.
that's the style choice that we made early on in order not to have to manipulate the wine in the winery. So the Albarino has a great acid profile. We buy from this gentleman who, when he planted the Albarino vineyard 20 years ago, everyone was like, Alba, what? And they thought he was crazy. And he could not sell the Albarino when he first grew it. And now everyone fights for it. And I'm happy to say that for the last 4 years, I have won.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's,
Hey.
I love the Albarino. And that is non-certified organic. And that's because he's just too lazy to get, I shouldn't say that. He's he's
I
he's not willing to go through the process of certifying. And boy, do I relate to that, because frankly, I mean, he's got an eensy weensy. It's less than an acre and a quarter of Albarino, and his
Oh, yeah.
certification process for that would be ridiculous, which is similar to what I looked
Right.
into when I wanted to certify as organic my vineyard. And it's for a small vineyard, it is cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
It would increase my wine cost by $2 to $5 a bottle, which is not, yeah,
Wow.
it's not going to happen. So I walked away from that, and so did he. So it's non-certified organic, which means that the consumer, if they care about organic, is going to have to trust me, which is a stretch,
Right.
or not buy it, because I look. I worked at Rainbow Groceries, one of the original organic groceries in the Bay Area, and I get the importance of certification, and I'm riding on the
Yep.
coattails, and I get that. And I also realize that people don't know me from a hole in the wall, and they could think I'm full of beans, and that's fine. And it might not be a good wine for them because all I have is the knowledge of how I grew it or how I know the person grew it. What I do is I'm out there in the vineyard with the person and with the people that are working on the grapes, and I know what goes into it. And
Yeah.
it's a trust thing.
The other thing that I would say that is an unknown resource to most people is the publicly available pesticide use
Yep.
reports that I've actually
Yep.
discovered recently and have written an article about it because I think it's an amazing thing that California does, where any grower who wants to grow has to report every pesticide that they put on their crop,
Right.
whether it's grapes or lettuce,
Right.
and they have to report that every time they use it.
Right.
And there is a public database going back to the 70s of every pesticide that's been put on every crop in the entire state of California.
And it
And
is
so if you want,
it's formidable. That's a formidable
it
tool if
is.
people knew about it.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some hoops to jump through. You have to contact the county of wherever the producer lives and ask for the records for them for the, however many years you're interested in finding out. But they send you a spreadsheet and you can see it all listed, and you can see if they're lying about, having used nothing that would have violated the organic certification, even if they aren't certified. So, I mean, it doesn't mean that they don't have to put in like, fertilizer if they're using a non organic fertilizer, obviously. Like if they wanted to use ammonium phosphate or whatever, they could. But, and that's not in there, but at least you get a sense of, are they spraying pesticides
Right.
that are bad
Right.
or not? Are they true to their word in that sense? So I think, the more and more I've been relying on that because I've been purchasing grapes and looking at potential things like that. I want to find out if I can trust people, and I don't trust people either. So I get that side of it as well. But yeah, that so there you go.
Yeah.
Just it out
No,
there.
it's a fabulous resource, and I actually have used it. It's only precluded me from purchasing one year one set of grapes, but that was valuable. So and then just to
Yeah.
finish, I make a pet nat out of Pinot Gris that's certified biodynamic grapes from Filigreen Farm,
Mm,
and I make a Pinot Noir out of only Pinot Noir from Filigreen Farm. So um, most of what I
nice.
make is it's either wild, non-certified organic, or certified biodynamic. And with the
Right.
apples, the same is true. They're either wild, or again, with Ornbound Road, we talked to everyone and asked them what they used when they were growing. So it's in that sense, it's because they're homeowners. It is their word. But I would like to think that people are pretty honest about what they're using. And then when we source from Filigreen, of course, everything again is certified biodynamic. So I'm comfortable enough with the growing mechanisms and the growing techniques that I can look people in the eye and say this is where stuff comes from, and this is what I think it contains. And you be the judge. You decide if that's what you want to do.
Right. Yep. No, I feel the same way, and I feel those pressures from both sides. As a consumer myself, but then also from the other side, working with people who it is a financial burden to get those certifications, but they obviously, working with them and talking with them, that they want to do good and that you can trust them. So
Right.
it is that dual sided thing.
Right. Right.
I guess one final thing I want you talk a lot on your website and just in us talking about carbon footprint. And I notice um, your bottles in the packaging, you don't have capsules over the top of your bottles. Does that have anything to do with just not wanting to have useless stuff? Maybe I'm looking at old picture. Maybe you do use capsules
Oh my
now.
God. Yeah, I could go for hours about it. Remember, what did I do before I did this? I was
Exactly.
a
That's what.
recycling person. It's one of the reasons that I still keg wine, even though it is one of the
Yeah.
hardest things to market and sell, because unfortunately, a lot of people who keg and sell wine are selling pretty bad wine in keg.
Right.
I have to be honest. And as a result, there are a lot of people trust keg wine, and the stuff I put in my keg is the same thing that goes in the bottle. There's no like,
Yep.
oh yeah, that's the garbage wine. Put it in the keg. So it's but I mean, if I could sell everything in keg, I would die and go to heaven. I have talked with, and I'll
Yeah.
tell
Me
you
too.
about how many
Yeah.
markets I've talked to about doing growlers. I'm like, come on, man, put in a system, get
Yeah.
the argon push, put in a system, do growlers. It's fabulous. All of Europe, right? You go to Italy, you go to a winery, you bring in your demijohn. It's called sfuso. It means loose wine. You decant. It's a fabulous way of getting really reasonable wine in large volumes so that you don't feel like you're, breaking the bank every time you're pouring another glass. Um, and it's the ultimate kind of reuse. It
Yeah.
kills me, all the bottles that go through.
Yeah.
Believe
And
me,
just,
if I could figure out a way to not do the cork, if I could figure out a way how to not do the label, yeah, I wish. I wish. It has been one of my it's the conundrum. And it is hard for me sometimes when I look at the palette of glass that comes in when I've got a bottle. It just kills me
yeah.
because I'm like, oh my God. And I have to be honest with you, when I first started making wine, when I make my own wine, I scrape labels and wash bottles. And
Yeah.
and that is a challenge and a commitment in and of itself.
Yep.
And I thought I was going to do that when I went commercial, and it was probably like the fifth or sixth case, and I'm like, okay, I'm not doing this.
Yeah, no, I know it's the demands of commercial. It is heartbreaking, and the same thing. I know it's like, I mean, I've made a point to source the lightest bottles possible that I can find, but it's still a lot of glass.
Right.
And yeah,
But
yeah,
but if you don't do glass, if you do plastic, if you do aluminum, then you've got
right,
other potential contamination that flies in the
yeah,
face of growing stuff organically. So, I mean, what I look at and what I think about and what I harken back to is that when you really, in the final analysis, what you really need to do is be as local as possible, with as little transportation as possible, the most efficiently as possible, and reuse those bottles if you can for something else.
yeah. Become a home winemaker and just reuse your commercial bottles for your home
Yeah.
wine. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. It's been honestly a delight to talk to you, and I can't wait to try your stuff. This happened so quickly. I haven't even had a chance to. But again, your wines, as you say, aren't available. Can we get your cider anywhere?
So you're in Southern California. The cider is not easy to get down there.
Okay,
Vinocity
I'll have to come up.
Selections carries my wines, and they have, yeah, it's Vinocity, or like Vino City Selections.
Okay.
Um, they're available in some markets. They were available in a lot of restaurants. I don't know what he's doing now. God bless him. We're all reinventing ourselves, and in the middle of the pandemic. But you're gonna have to wait till you come back up here to try the ciders. I'm sorry.
All
I don't
right.
have enough. I
All right.
really don't have. So basically, I sell to where I drive.
Right.
So I mean, I know that sounds horrible, but I've avoided like selling stuff in Sacramento because I'm like, I'm not driving to Sacramento. Screw that. Um, and it
Everything.
varies. I started out about like at 130 cases, and I have been as high as 1,400, and I'm now down to about 800. And
Okay.
that's a pretty comfortable area. I'm 60 years old, and I have a back that is like, yeah, I think I can move 800 cases a year, because you move every case 3, maybe 4, right? So I'm like,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's probably enough. So that's pretty
You
much
get your
where I'm at
exercise for
with
the
that.
year.
But
That's
yeah,
great.
the you're gonna have to come up here for this. You let me know when you come up. I'll fix you up with
Well,
some
now I
wine.
have a reason to
Now you have
come.
a
I'm
reason, and
excited.
it's beautiful.
It is. It is. Yeah. I know. I might have to move there at some point myself. Um, well, thank you. Do you want to please mention your website and Instagram channels
Oh
or
God. Yeah, I
whatever?
know. I should do all
Sorry.
this. You can tell I'm like yeah, I should be better at marketing. So the website is www.yamakiriwines.com. And I don't, well, my Instagram is just Yamakiri Wines, I think. And then Alex has
Yeah.
Sineater Ciders. So um
Sineater
if you put
Ciders.
in
Yeah.
Yamakiri, it's a weird enough name. You'll get it. Uh, you'll find it. There's very little Yamakiri out there. So um
Yeah. What does Yamakiri mean?
it's funny. Normally, that's the first question I get. Yamakiri is Japanese for foggy mountain, which is, we have a
Oh,
very foggy mountain. We have this weird weather system where we're at, where we get intense sun and then a lot of fog, not unusual to the rest of the valley. And I chose, instead of calling it foggy mountain wine, um, I chose the Japanese in deference to, again, Masanobu Fukuoka, and his teachings and book One Straw Revolution, and an approach to farming that we hope to emulate, and support and announce to the world as best we can.
I love that. Well, that sounds like a great send-off. Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate you doing this. It's been great talking.
My pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening. I don't take your time or attention for granted and really appreciate any feedback that you want to send to adam@centraliswine.com. That's adam@centraliswine.com. And Centralis Wine is my winery where you can buy wine that supports organic, biodynamic, regenerative viticulture and agricultural in general. Centralis is the sponsor of this podcast, so you also support the people who I feature here. So thank you so much, and please check us out, centraliswine.com.